Hey, everybody. I want to talk to you about the resurrection. I want to talk to you about a question that I've been pondering and see what you're thinking. I'd love to hear from you, what your comments might be. My question is, what do you think God is actually saying to us as Christians in the church, or as leaders in our generation, hoping to pass on the faith to the next generation? What is God saying to us in the middle of this COVID crisis, and maybe even the constraints that are imposed at this point and seem to be, they're here for a good while longer. And even as we transition back to meeting, it's going to be a long time and things are forever different. So what's God saying? That's the question. Well, one of my answers that I wanted to share with you is I think I'm discovering that the Lord has really pushed me out of my comfort zone into communicating his love and trying to think about ways, how do I communicate his love through a medium like this? It's so constrained. It's not natural, right? It's the epitome of technology. And I love the fact that it exists, but what does it mean that we're so constrained to that? I put this in the context of the resurrection because I can't think of a worse constraint in life than things like something like death and the separation that is death, and that Jesus bursts out of that constraint. He bursts out of the constraints that would keep him from his disciples and reveals himself even through the worst of possible situations as one who overcomes and one who has victory over that too. And the gospel penetrates into the hearts of some fearful disciples and they're forever transformed. I think our next generation lives much more in the constraints of these kinds of communication technologies than we did. And it has its strengths and it has its disadvantages. And I would never downplay the disadvantages, but they live there a lot more. And how does our generation, those of you who are close to my age, think about reaching them, particularly if they don't engage a lot in the more interpersonal ways? Well, this is certainly one way you could say that the Lord might get us out of our comfort zone and entering into a more constrained form of communication and trying to be full of his presence in such a way that we're used there too. Behind me is this desk. It's a stand-up desk. A few years ago, I felt like the Lord was saying, I want you to build a stand-up desk. It's sort of like a symbol of something that I want you to stand up into. And I immediately thought of that as, oh, he's speaking to me about something that he wants to really raise up within me. He wants to lift up within me. It has to do with the resurrection. The standing up posture it's a resurrection posture in the early church. And so a lot of times, especially in the Easter season, churches will stand throughout a service. And that was I think it was pretty much the only way you did a worship service in the earliest days of the church, is you'd stand, because it was a resurrection posture. It was an upsurging insurgency kind of a worship. And you didn't sit, and you certainly didn't lie down and sit back like a passive observer. I think we passively consume so many things. I think the temptation for me is that even in this environment where we do Zoom meetings, is that I sit back and I don't think about conveying communication. I don't think about presence. And I feel like today, at least, the Lord's saying, I want you to really enter into the resurrection. I want you to enter into some of the surgency that you understand at some level. And it's so that you can share the gospel. That's what that desk was about for me, so that I could take a little bit more seriously and stand up into the call that I had to share in word and in sermon and word, whatever, by studying and seeking the Lord in my study and doing it standing up in resurrection reality. I read a little hymn this morning. It's poetry at this point, but it's the first hymn book of the church. It's called the Odes of Solomon. And in this particular one, it's called the Upright Cross. The person who's writing this hymn is a poet. He's saying, I extended my hands and hallowed my Lord, for the expression of my hands is his sign. It's his banner of love. It's the expression of the cross, which is our Lord's sign. And he says, my extension is the upright cross. And what this poet, this hymn writer of old who was just trying to love the Lord was saying is that I lift him up this way, and I become a living sign of his sign of love on the cross, but also his sign of love when he came to bless the disciples in the upper room after he was raised, or when he ascended to the Lord, he was in the same posture. And it's almost like, can you enter into that? I feel like that's what the Lord is saying, is that he looked forward to that moment when he would be lifted up, because then he would draw all people to himself. And that's what happened. And his resurrection is an uplift, and his ascension to the right hand of the Father is an uplift. And then his Spirit coming into us is to be an uplift. And then we, with him, extend that to others. I just want to give a very simple example. I was talking to a friend today, and she was describing how her kids are into video gaming, and I've had kids into that, and that's where I started to realize there's a difference in this next generation. I didn't even like talking about video games, even though a few of my kids are into it. And they would like watch other people playing video games, and they'd have like a watching party. I didn't even know what that was. And here I am seeing that all the time now on social networking. And it's happening even when people my generation are doing watching parties. And I'm having to think about, how do you communicate? I'm learning. The Lord's pushing me out of a nest of comfort to reach with that way. But I didn't know that, and my friend didn't know that either. And the Lord just convicted her at one point to, no, listen to this child of yours, this kid who's really into the video games. And they kind of discovered each other. She had the patience and the willingness to really come present to her kid through that love that they had of a different medium of communication. And it was a blessing. It was a blessing for both of them. It kind of like lifted up their relationship to a new level of mutual understanding and respect and love. I don't think you can share the love of Jesus if you don't have a mutual respect and a mutual understanding of the next generation. And I think that the Lord is maybe it's a kind of a very imposed discipline that the church is having to figure out, and people in my generation are having to figure out, how do we convey love, and how do we convey resurrection through the constraint of this kind of medium? Oh man, if the Lord can convey life through death, and we can convey good news and love through these media. And that's what I'm praying that we'll enter into, and that we figure out ways to take the Lord up on his offer and communicate to that next generation and express an interest in them and be present. It's just really practically. I'm even thinking, like, if I'm going to a Zoom meeting, am I leaning into to express with as much truthfulness and as much presence as I can what it is that I mean to say in word and in all the ways that we have to communicate? Because that's what the Lord has us here for, is to continue to communicate as best we can, despite serious constraints. And he's always willing to enter into constraints because he loves that much. And his Spirit especially can be our primary media. I'll talk about that some more later, but I think that the Lord is stirring up in me a desire to communicate the love of God and resurrection presence, and to share that even through these media. I encourage you to think and pray. How can you come present much more? How can you be a blessing, whether it's in word or just facial expression? I'm even thinking like practical things like, can somebody see me when I'm participating in these things? And what does my own physical presence convey somehow? So that's where I'm at right now. I just wanted to share with you. It's a bit of a call. It's a bit of an encouragement. I think the Lord's pushed us out of a comfort zone, but he really wants to bring generations together, and maybe he'll use this situation, this season of COVID for that purpose. God bless you all. Bye.